We are here today looking at the top 5 things in the Lincoln collection at the Allen County Public Library. A top 5 list for a collection like this is extremely difficult to pick. We pick a variety of items based on popularity, based on cool factor and the wow factor, and based on historical significance as well. First off, on our list, definitely the most popular item in our collection, the most well-known item in our collection, is the Mary Todd Lincoln spirit photo. This photo is unusual for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a ghost in the photo. Spirit photography was something that was extremely popular during and after the Civil War. Most people had lost a family member and wanted to reconnect. So via psychics and seances, suddenly people are reconnecting with ghosts and they wanted to actually see those ghosts. So you would go to a spirit photographer, sit very, very still for a long period of time, and you would walk out with an image that looked a lot like this, with a spirit standing around you. Now, oftentimes when you would get a spirit photo done, you didn't know the spirit. It was someone who knew the person who had died in your life. This one's unusual because it's definitely Abraham Lincoln. And he's definitely standing behind Mary, and he even has his hand on top of her shoulder. It's also an unusual photo because this is the last photo ever taken of Mary Todd. This is taken in 1872. She lives another 10 years, but never sits in front of a camera again. And I know you're wondering, is it real? Well, it's a real photo. Mary really did sit for William Mumler, the spirit photographer, while he was in Boston. That's really her. Whether the ghost is real or not, well, that's up to you. All right, our second item that is representative of our very, very large newspaper collection is a copy of the Daily Citizen from Vicksburg, Mississippi. Now, for you Civil War history buffs, you know Mississippi, not Union territory, very much Confederate. And at this point, on July 2nd, 1863, very sure that they are not going to fall to Grant's impending forces. So they write a very long article about how Grant will not come to Vicksburg. He will not take it, and even if he does, there's nothing left in the city because they've been under siege for so long. Well, unfortunately, on July 3rd, Grant does take Vicksburg. And July 4th, when the Union troops start wandering around, they find a copy of this paper sitting on the news press. They add a little addendum right down here at the bottom. And it's dated July 4th, 1863. 2 days bring about great change. Not only has Grant taken the city, but he's brought his own meal, so it's okay that there's nothing left here for him to eat. And this shall be the last edition and a curiosity of the wallpaper edition of this Daily Citizen. Well, wallpaper edition, well, Vicksburg was out of everything, including newsprint, which meant they were printing on actual rolls of wallpaper. The Lincoln collection is also known for having hundreds of books. One of these books actually belonged to Abraham Lincoln, along with a larger collection that was his personal copies of items. This is the Life and Speeches of Henry Clay. Now, Henry Clay was Lincoln's ideal politician. Try and open it. He was the man that Lincoln modeled himself after. He followed his policies. Clay was very instrumental in the Missouri Compromise, so where slavery was heading in the Mason-Dixon line. And what's interesting is this version actually belonged to Lincoln himself. Now, it's a 2-volume set, so there's another one of these. And there's only something interesting in one of the very back chapters. Clay writes about the spread of slavery, and you'll notice there are actually some doodles in the book itself. These are Lincoln's doodles and his underlinings and his notations in the margins. So he actually held these pages, touched them, and wrote on them. It's the only place we find writing in the entire 2-volume set, which meant that Lincoln was thinking about slavery well before he became president. It's also a miracle that this book survived at all. It's actually been through a fire. The great news is everything that was part of the book survived except the outer casings. So it was rebound, gets a new front and back cover, and actually has had the original cover pasted onto it. So something that the Lincoln Collection has here at the Allen County Public Library is extremely special and something that nowhere else has in the entire galaxy. And that is the Lincoln Family Photo Album. These are the photos that belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln and were passed down through later generations. They include images of course, the President and the First Lady. We've got lots of images of Abraham and his wife. They also include images of the Lincoln sons. They include Robert Todd Lincoln, the eldest, Willie Lincoln, the second youngest, and my personal favorite, Tad, the baby of the family. Now, you'll notice a couple of things, especially if you're up on your Lincoln history. Number one, the Lincolns actually had 4 sons. They had a son between Robert and William named Eddie. Now, unfortunately, Eddie died just before his 4th birthday, and there are no existing photos of Eddie, so that's why he's not represented as a photograph in the album. And on this image of Tad, you might notice some doodles. Tad is wearing a very traditional zouave uniform with big puffy pants and a tight little vest and hat. He is decided that he doesn't quite look soldierly enough. So Tad himself has drawn on a mustache, goatee, eyebrows, sideburns, and a sword and sword belt. This is probably one of the earliest examples of Photoshop that you'll find in this album. Speaking of Photoshop, the Lincoln Collection has thousands of images and photos that are real, but we also have a few that don't quite fit the bill. For example, let's look at this lovely picture of Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln. It's beautiful, it's the couple standing together. It also never happened. Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln were never photographed together intentionally. Mary specifically was very, very particular about her photos and her portrait, and she did not want to be photographed with her husband. She was 5'2", he was 6'4", and she said they would look ridiculous standing next to each other. Well, unfortunately, most of the US public wanted a picture of the President and the First Lady. So these composites are created from 2 separate photos, then etched or drawn together, a very crude type of early markup. We also have this beautiful image of the Lincoln family. And you'll notice Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln are in it, so we know immediately that it's not a real photo. What's great about this is it was actually done so well that we can look at every single person in the photograph and trace it to an actual photograph that was taken of the family members. Our collection has not only the CDV images that you've seen, the cabinet larger images, but we also have some much more fragile ambrotypes. These are your first type of photography where you're actually printing single copies onto a glass plate. They're extremely fragile, which means that you actually have to frame them to keep them from flaking or breaking and snapping. This one actually shows the 2 youngest Lincoln sons, Willie and Tad. And what's really great about them is, besides that both boys look very uncomfortable in their finest garb, if you look at their cheeks, they're actually painted pink to look a little more alive and awake. Again, another example of Photoshop. What's really great about this piece is actually it was used in the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis. If you look over Mary Todd's shoulder in the movie, you will see this piece recreated on her nightstand